Oh, there it is. Good morning, everyone. It's Madeline with Together SC. We're thrilled to have you with us this morning as we bring to you from North Carolina, the Richmond Federal Reserve. Erica Bell and Jason Smith are with us this morning. They are going to share a program that the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond has started, about a year ago, Erica, I think?
It's been in the works for a little bit longer. We'll talk about that. Yes.
And I have the good fortune of serving on the Community Investment Council for the South Carolina and so I've gotten to know Erica and Jason in that capacity, and have been hearing about this program, and it really makes sense for South Carolina to pay attention to this program and look at opportunities to partner and collaborate with it. So again, if you will please share in the chat your name, where you're calling in from, your organization. We've got a good mixture of funding partners and working nonprofits. So with that, I have lost the PowerPoint. There we go. Yes, virtual introductions, got that covered. Erica, would you please start us off by giving us an overview of the Federal Reserve, its work, and specifically the work of the Richmond branch?
Yes. And first want to say, Madeline, thank you for your service on the Community Investment Council. For those of you who have an interest in that, we bring together nonprofits, foundation leaders, and others to serve on the Community Investment Council. With Madeline's retirement, we will be filling that seat for South Carolina in the coming months. So again, thank you for your service. And
let me add to that then.
Yes.
Nate Barber from South Carolina Community Loan Fund serves with me, so it's always fun to be there with Nate. Erica, actually, we met when she was working for the Y in York.
Yes.
So she comes to this work from a nonprofit background. So know that what's most important for the person sitting on this board is the ability to help the feds understand what's happening across South Carolina in the economic development space, and to hear voices that they might not hear otherwise. And I, have had the honor of collecting your ideas and thoughts and sharing them back. And I would encourage anyone that's interested in serving with it, contacting Erica, because I have loved serving.
Yes, thank you. And particularly voices that are in service to low and moderate income communities. So thank you for that, Madeline. And I always have to start off with a disclaimer, but the views expressed here are our own and do not necessarily represent an official position of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond or the Federal Reserve System. I'll just get started with a brief overview of what the Federal Reserve is. And you can see here, hopefully everyone is seeing the slides. This is a district map of the United States. There are 12 district banks across the United States and the Board of Governors. We operate separately, so to speak, with our own operations. So with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, we have both Carolinas, Virginia, most of West Virginia, Maryland, and DC. The little dot that looks like it's right on top of South Carolina represents our Charlotte branch, which is where I sit. And then the bigger dot right above Richmond represents the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond in Richmond, which is our largest facility where main operations are, and Jason is there. And then we also have a Baltimore branch, which is within the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. The Board of Governors also sits within our district bank, though they operate separately as the Board of Governors. You'll see the 12 district banks. A lot of times we get the question, why in the world is it all over the East Coast? Because these Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond was established as a central bank, and the lines were drawn in 1913 based on different trade routes. They have not changed. So you'll see not as many in the West and more in the East. That's the district map. So today we're here to talk about focusing on our focus on rural communities and small towns. And we often get the question there again too, why? Why are you there? And so we at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, taking you back to high school economics, we have the dual mandate, and the dual mandate is for the Federal Reserve is to promote the goals of maximum employment and stable pricing. And so we, in
Erica,
short, price stability. Yes, Jason, did
I'm
you
sorry
need me?
to interrupt. I just wanted to check and see if everyone is being able to see your screens, because right now I'm not seeing the slides. So I just want to make sure other people are able to before we get too much further.
Can I have an audible? I can't hear any. I can't see
All right, we
everyone.
got thumbs up. All right.
Okay,
I
great.
just
Okay,
want to make sure it was just me. Thanks.
Jason, it may be off your screen. You know how, or you may be in full screen mode.
great. So back to Econ Ed, we have our dual mandate focuses on price stability and maximum employment. And the Federal Reserve is also mandated to think about employment and credit outcomes for low to moderate income communities. And that is how I have a role in community development at the Federal Reserve. When the Community Reinvestment Act was established, they did make roles around community development in order to help banks understand that for those who invest in those who have deposits should be investing in their communities. So we work to really understand what's happening with low to moderate income in various communities within our goal. We are focused on rural because they generally have higher low to moderate income residents and lower labor force participation. All right, I'll go to the next slide. So we have some slides. I love maps. So we have a map here that demonstrates some of the things that we look at. Particularly here you will see the greenish shade represents rural areas. The brownish shades represent more urban areas. So this is a map of the share of people who are low to moderate income, either in urban or rural. When you look at the map, the darker the color, the greater the percentage of low to moderate income in that county. So you can see there, South Carolina, we have the lower part, and then kind of the upper corner showing greater than 45% in the rural areas. You will see the darker kind of in the middle. So that would be, looks like the Columbia area counties or urban, but greater than 45% LMI. So this is just something that we look at in community development to give you an idea. We include the whole map of the 5th district so you can understand how our states compare with others in the district. The big swath of green up at the top, since the state lines aren't bolded, much of that is West Virginia. So it will make sense as you look at the map. Here we have a map or a graph that shows employment to population ratio. Employment to population ratio is the statistical measure of the proportion of working age population, so ages 25 to 64, that is employed. On the x-axis, so the horizontal line at the bottom, you will see you'll see numbers. At the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, for research purposes, we use rural-urban continuum codes. They go 1 through 9, and we consider 3 through 9 rural areas. Each county is typically assigned a rural urban continuum code, a number 1 through 9. And again, we consider 3 through 9 for our research purposes rural. You will see 1s and 2s. That's usually those that have a population of greater than 250,000 shown in the 1 and 2 column. So then on the Y, you have the ratio of, again, working age population that is employed. So for the more urban 1 to 2, the 1 to 2s on the horizontal, you have close to 80% with in more urban places. And then we look down like at a 7, which is a much lower population, so more rural, so small town rural, you will see that, like, for example, on 7, we're down to 60%. And so that is why the Federal Reserve cares and makes and has a high priority objective around small towns and rural communities. And I believe I'm kicking it over to to Jason now for the next slide, which is more about why the Richmond Fed is leading this work around the Rural Investment Collaborative. But I want to pause there to see if we have any questions. We have most time built in at the end for Q&A, but Madeline suggested we have a pause right here to see if anyone has any questions around the data and why, who the Federal Reserve is, what we're doing, and why we're working in rural. So I'll pause there.
Erica, one thing to add on to what you said, many folks on this call probably know Bernie Mazik and the work of SCASAT. And Bernie is very involved with y'all. He chairs one of your committees. I can't remember which one.
Yes, he is the chair of our Charlotte branch board.
And the work you guys do with community economic development and that effort as well. You may have mentioned it, but I didn't hear it. And so I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Madeline. Any questions before we move on?
I'm not seeing any in the chat.
Okay, great. Jason.
Sure. Well, it's great to meet you all and see how many different parts of South Carolina are represented. Share a little bit more about, why we're leading this work on rural. Currently, the focus of our bank and one of our key areas is on rural because it is representative of so much of our nation's economy. And the fact that one of the things the Fed looks at are areas where there are persistent differences in outcomes for people. And so rural communities are one where there can be significant disparities in access to capital or access to investment money that's needed to help communities thrive. And so as the Fed is positioned to have a voice and a perspective on the importance of capital and our workforce and in participation, we really are seeking to lift up that opportunity to enhance that for rural communities. And we also serve as a neutral convener who is able to bring together stakeholders in a way that can benefit communities and able to better access capital flow. Sometimes that means changes to policy, and sometimes it means changes to practice. And while we don't advocate for any specific policies or legislation, we can highlight things that seem to be working. The Fed's outreach staff also have relationships, and as I'm sure that Erica knows many of you there in South Carolina. I'm still looking forward to getting to South Carolina to do some visits as part of my role. I'm based out of the Richmond office. And so maybe I'll get to see some of you when I head that direction. But we are out in the communities and are able to develop those relationships, as Erica said, to listen and to be able to bring information back that does inform monetary policy. It informs the way that we're looking at how to support communities on the access to capital and workforce participation. But it also gives us opportunities to be in communities and to share information and opportunities that we're seeing in other rural communities to help spread those opportunities and learning. But back here, and particularly here in the Richmond branch of the Richmond Federal Reserve, we also have a pretty deep bench of researchers, data analysts, communications, and other groups that can help to elevate those best practices and share what the data are showing to be able to support communities. And so with that, we'll switch to the next slide and begin to provide a little bit of an overview about the work that I've been helping to lead with Erica and others on our team that is a collaborative. And so could we go to the next slide, please? Or am I able to?
I just did advance it to the
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the what we're here to talk a lot about today is specifically one part of our work in rural, and it's the Rural Investment Collaborative. And so the Rural Investment Collaborative is truly a collaborative the Richmond Fed is helping to convene that brings together leaders from different communities who are in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, West Virginia, and national leaders around rural that are in DC. To help the participants learn and share some of the things that are helping to improve the lives of people in rural communities, particularly around this area of access to capital. And one of the signature focuses of that is around providing some training and support to communities who are seeking to be able to develop investable project proposals. Erica earlier shared a disclaimer about the views represented here. I share another one that's on the bottom of this slide that while we're really grateful to be able to help convene this group, you'll hear things here that are being led by the steering group. as well, and that the Richmond Fed staff don't specifically engage in any fundraising. We don't select the grantees. We don't even select the communities that get to receive the technical assistance and training. There's a lot of support and work that is coming through our steering group and project development work group and others who both helped in the design, but also in the selection and decision making in those areas. So I'm going to. It looks like I'm not able to advance. So Erica, if you
You're
don't
on
mind.
the opportunity, and then
Yep.
so I'll advance to the next slide after the opportunity, shared benefits and shared contributions.
Yeah, thank you. So, we really wanted to make sure that at this point, before we go into more detail about the Rural Investment Collaborative and the community investment training, to just go ahead and share what some of the benefits are to your community as you're listening, so that you're listening for those things. But you also may hear of areas where you see opportunities to partner in more of a contributing role. And so, how you could benefit, one of the things that we really hope that you'll take away from this presentation and our discussion is that you may be on this call and think, wow, this is a program or a training that I would benefit from attending, or someone in my organization may benefit from attending. And that's certainly one way that people could benefit by being part of this call today. Another is that you may be a funder who is looking to invest in communities, and you have rural communities, counties, towns where you wish you could invest, but you're not getting investable project proposals right now. And we've heard from some funders who have helped to recruit people to go through this training that's one of the things they hope to get out of it, is to maybe expand their reach into communities they don't currently have applications coming in that they would like to see. And then beyond maybe that individual funder level, to really look at what it looks like to have a pipeline of investment ready projects in South Carolina that are in some of the other areas that are not currently having some of the capital flow to them. And so ultimately, the impact and the opportunity there is that these people who are trained, these communities who have developed additional skills on how to draw down investment monies, can leverage their local investments and maybe your local investments in those communities for a greater impact by being able to pull in other sources of funding for those projects. On our end, we certainly have an interest in your participation because Erica knows lots of folks in South Carolina, and Madeline and folks on our Community Investment Council can help to get the word out. But we don't know everyone. And so we hope that as we think about the next years, coming years of the application process for the training you'll hear about, that you may listen to this presentation and think of communities that would benefit from applying and participating. Another thing that is helpful is, even if sometimes people are not accepted into the program, they may need some coaching or mentoring to continue to refine and work on their proposals until it is ready. And so there's opportunities to coach or mentor. And then you'll hear more about the technical assistance and some of the resources that are needed to support people who are participating in this program. So we'll go ahead to give more description now about what the Rural Investment Collaborative is and why it's happening. So we started off with a different model that we were looking to base this work on, based on what the Boston Fed had done at a time when there was a lot of funding flowing from the federal government. And what we heard at that time, it was going to be just in Virginia, was that the program that required a competitive planning process, and then some communities would have been selected for implementation grants, that the communities were just overwhelmed by the funding that was coming from the federal government, and that certain communities were not being able to really successfully seek out those funding opportunities. And so we stepped back and we listened to the rural centers, councils, and hubs and asked them, like, what is it that you all could work on together that you would have a hard time doing on your own? And what they came back with and shared with us is that those towns were really having a hard time with absorbing the funding that was available. So available funding doesn't really mean that it's accessible, is what they were saying. And the reason it wasn't accessible came down to kind of a basic economic supply and demand model. Where on the demand side, despite great potential, great ideas, people spotting things that they would like to see happen, they didn't necessarily have people who were able to describe the project in a way that was investable. We have a lot of folks who are the county mayor, as well as a teacher or a person who is working on the farm during the day, and people are wearing multiple hats, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are trained to be able to describe an investable project. Then on the other side, on the supply side, even if someone has written the best proposal for some of these capital projects, it doesn't mean that there aren't gaps in the funding, that there aren't requirements that aren't very well aligned or considering of the reality of small towns. And so there's an opportunity to better coordinate and address some of those supply side issues as well. So as we move forward, we'll get into a little bit more detail, and then eventually I will share some examples of some of the different programs. But that's really the why, and this is the how. So we're bringing those groups together in order to help share some of those best practices, and at the same time, and to engage in training and learning. And at the same time, we're also convening some of the national and regional funders to help them look at what are some of the things that could be done to help the system to make that access to capital better. Today, you're going to hear more about the investment training called the community investment training, and how people who go through that training receive technical assistance opportunities, and also have some opportunities for continued investment after that. But first, I just want to highlight some of the partners we have here on the next slide that have been with us on this journey. As I said, this is truly a collaborative. The Richmond Fed is not the only or even at times the leading partner on some of the aspects of the work. The training and the curriculum that you'll hear about was something that was developed with and for Invest Appalachia, and we license that, and they help us run that. Invest Appalachia is a great partner. The Richmond Federal Reserve provides funding and resources to help support this work, but you'll hear about areas where the steering group wanted to do things that were beyond what the Federal Reserve is allowed or able to do with its budget. And so Appalachian Community Capital is serving as a fiscal agent that receives some funding from the steering group's efforts to raise some funds for these communities. And then the other partners are listed here. You'll see many of the rural centers, councils, and hubs. And there in South Carolina, we have worked closely for the last couple of years with the South Carolina Department of Commerce, with Peggy and Fern and others, as they've helped to guide and develop the concepts that you'll hear about here. So how do we organize all of these great partners that are part of the work with us? We have some work groups that are part of the operating structure. And as we look at that, we have a steering group that I've mentioned, which is representative of the people who are in those rural centers, councils, and hubs. We'll be expanding the membership of this a little bit now that the partnership is up and going. And this group really helps to identify and prioritize the work. They're very active in setting the direction for the year. And they also are the ones that if the direction that they're seeking to go in requires additional resources, they have a subgroup that is a resource committee that helps to seek some of those funds that they want to be able to support communities with. But they also inform and monitor the work, and then they pull together work groups that are really practitioner-led groups that are able to help to carry some of the work forward. The steering group ultimately is the voting body that helps to make decisions about participation and who receives resources. So the project development work group is more focused on that demand side that we talked about earlier. And so they represent practitioners who are really aware of the needs of communities. We have and are trying to maintain having a couple of people on that group who've actually been participants in the training that you'll hear about. So they have firsthand knowledge about what it takes to go through the program, what is needed afterwards, and who might benefit as well. So they help with both the recruitment and also helping to guide the selection and training process for cohorts that you'll hear about for that community investment training. On the other side, we have the capital development work group. This includes funders, national policymakers, and other experts who really understand the capital ecosystem and the way that funding flows or doesn't always flow so well in the communities. And so they're looking at a theory of action, or like what would it take in order to help improve some of those things for communities. I like visuals, and so on the next slide, I try to simplify what we're doing. And really what we're looking at is a funnel approach. We're trying to open up the funnel so that more communities have access and can benefit from training and from the available capital that's out there. So what we heard is that in specific sectors, in infrastructure or green energy or different areas, there are already training opportunities and ways to help communities apply for federal funding and other types of investment money if you already have a basic understanding of how that capital stack or the like putting together different types of investment works. But in some small towns and communities, that person is lacking, or they don't have a position for it. And so it might not be the usual person who would be the right person to help go through that process. And those people often are turned away from some of the larger opportunities for cohorts or support programs because of that need for the basic understanding that is there. So we really wanted to open up the funnel. No matter what the type of project is a community think would help them thrive, to people who may not usually the person you'd first think of as the person who would be seeking out investments for a Main Street development or for some form of a aggregation of agricultural products or other types of programs you'll hear about. So what we're seeking to do is to have 16 to 20 communities who will go through the leadership training program that we'll share with you. We actually just accepted 25 into the next cohort, so we're exceeding what we had as targets. So I need to update the slide already. When they graduate from the 16-week training that I'll share more about, they receive a mini grant to keep that work going forward. And then we expect that some people will be able to move forward with other sources of technical assistance, or maybe their projects aren't exactly the right fit. So then we're aiming to provide technical assistance, through vendors to help some of those projects move forward. This can be anything from architectural renderings to engineering studies, historical studies for structures, lots of different types of technical assistance. And then to have even, a few of those move forward, maybe one per state that might receive implementation funding, and those could take different forms. It could be a regular grant that many of us are familiar with. It could also be something like a forgivable loan where there's a loan that comes through, and if the project is very successful, it's able to be paid back, or a recoverable grant where, initial funds are able to be provided at the sale of a property or something. Those funds might be recovered. And of course, some funds that could just go straight in. And then ultimately, the Richmond Federal Reserve is not a nonprofit that would run a training program like this forever. Other organizations would be able to replicate the things that are being modeled through this multiple phase approach of training, technical assistance, implementation. But what we really hope to see is that capital development work group that was on the last slide is able to take learning from what happens in these communities and help demonstrate what is possible through the evaluation and through some improvements to the system, so that adoption could happen in a way that's really transformative and not just a training program. We can probably find a way to go a little bit above 25 a year to go through the training. But ultimately, the way to get to scale is by improving the system itself. So we can go ahead to the next slide, and I'll be able to share a little bit more about the actual training that is being provided. The community investment training originally was titled the Framers Training. It is about framing up a project in a way that people can understand why it is investable. And what we heard as we were out and focus grouping and sharing information about the project is that people thought framer training might be for construction workers or for carpenters. And so Invest Appalachia, our partner, was gracious in letting us call it the community investment training. And that also allows us to differentiate in that we have these other phases of support that are provided. But really what we're looking for is helping communities have investment-ready projects. And these can be community development or economic development. But in all cases, they involve some kind of investment that is beyond grants. So the Rural Investment Collaborative is 16 weeks of experiential curriculum. It helps to train leaders about what it takes to take that idea that they've spotted, the opportunity, and really turn it into something that others can see why they may want to invest in it. And we've been able to work with Invest Appalachia to expand this past the initial pilot, which was done in West Virginia, primarily. Then there was a second group that was done in Western North Carolina and Appalachia, and really begin to look at, does this work in the Low Country? Does this work in the Eastern Shore of Virginia and Maryland? Does it work in that 95 corridor where it has very different issues than maybe Appalachia does? And so does this work in a more generalizable way across rural communities and small towns? And so we have been able to expand. We had 18 graduates from the first community investment training. And as I said last week, we had the meeting and reviewed the applications from South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. And the steering group selected 25 more leaders to participate, for those being from South Carolina. So the training sessions are taught by subject matter experts. We try to make sure there are people from each of the different states who represent different type of organizations with that content expertise, but also to have practitioners who are those near peers who recently completed or led a community or economic development project. And some of them are actually people who just went through the training themselves and their project is still underway. And what we have found is that the people who are coming into this project that maybe have had a car loan or a home loan, but have never put together a complex financial deal for a property or something, really benefit from seeing those other people who can say to them, hey, I was right where you were just a couple weeks ago. When I went through this training, I didn't know if I was the right person either, but look at what I'm able to do now. And so the cohort members come in, they've got an idea for a project that is not expected to be well developed. And at times it even changes during the training or afterwards. We've had that happen. Actually, one of our South Carolina participants from last year came through, pitched or presented their project for feedback, and afterwards realized, you know what? I need to pivot and do a slightly different project with this learning. And they came back and were awarded technical assistance funding because they applied the same learning to a different project that was more fitting to move forward. So that's the real hope, is people take the content and are able to continue to apply it to different projects in their areas. Then the graduates receive a mini grant. This is not a large amount of money. We're talking about $2,000 there that allows them to continue the engagement of the community, to keep the project moving while they're seeking technical assistance and implementation funding. And then they are eligible to apply for technical assistance and implementation funding through the program. But they also are able to then take those skills and use them to seek other opportunities. And we're really excited to see where people who just graduated in May of this year have already leveraged over $100,000 in technical assistance from other sources, even before they still haven't found out the ones of them that are being awarded based on last week's meeting, funding from us. But they've been able to leverage the training for funding from others. And some of them have also started to get implementation funds. So when we're thinking about, and hope that you will think about, people who might benefit from the training, this next slide shows a little bit more about what we're thinking and what the steering group is looking for in people who would participate. So as you're thinking about people you might nominate in South Carolina, of course, the first thing is that this is the same map, I believe, that Erica had earlier, that shows kind of where the rural areas are and where there's greater low and moderate income areas. That you would look in these areas in South Carolina that are the darker green or greenish blue, teal, depending on what your eyes see, you might see it a little differently than I do. But looking at those areas that are the most rural and the most low or moderate income, and thinking about people who may benefit from this training through from those communities, so that it can help to build capacity. The next thing to consider is, are there already some alignment opportunities or opportunities to connect to state and national priorities for investment? So we know in South Carolina, you'll have a tiered county approach, and other of your organizations may have priority counties that you're seeking to work with closely. These might be places where, with some training, that momentum could really help to get things going. And so we really do seek where there are opportunities to connect to existing efforts, and trust that you all will help to be able to see that. Another area is that we do want, while this is a person-based training, an individual leader goes through, we do want to see that there's a community sponsorship or investment. And so a local organization, which could be a United Way, it could be a community foundation, it could be a municipality, or other nonprofit or public organization that sees an opportunity for the community and the project. This is particularly important when the application is coming from a small business or an individual who is working on a project that may be for profit. That is something that we welcome into this program as well. But what we want to see in that and what the steering group makes decisions based on is, does this person fit into a broader Main Street development plan? Does it fit into a community development plan, a community health needs assessment for a nonprofit hospital? Like, how does it fit into a broader community vision for the community to thrive? And so while that community part is there, we also want to have individual leaders who have the opportunity, once they go through the training, to spot other projects as well, so that they are embedded into the community. So we've had people who have looked to apply, who came, who wanted to do a project in a community, but they lived in an urban area in a different state. That doesn't necessarily help to develop that capacity locally in the way that what we're really seeking to do here through a person and place-based approach. And then as they make decisions, ultimately, they are looking to make sure there's a diversity within the region and other factors so that the participants are able to go back and be advocates for the project and the proposal. I really wish I could share the map with you of where everyone is coming from for the next cohort. It gets me really excited to see these little green dots all over the place in each of these states. But what we're also finding is that by having increased representation from different areas, those people are being so helpful in helping to recruit the next group because they've gone through it and they've been helping to advocate for others that they think would benefit. And so with that, what we're really hoping to see is momentum that is able to help build this as kind of a transformative effort that starts to spread and grow. And so as we look at 18 graduates from last year, 25 from this next cohort being grown, that will help to form an alumni network of people that will help more people see the opportunity to do this type of work. So going to get to share a little bit about some names and faces of people that you might recognize from South Carolina. These are the 4 graduates from the cohort last year. Kim Bowman was a consultant and looking at working with some different communities. Michael Mahaffey is the one that had come through with more of a nonprofit grant type of project during his program. And that was part of the feedback in his pitch was that, you really want to look at projects that are able to draw on other forms of investment capital. And he came back with a completely different project for his request for technical assistance. Elizabeth Overton's working in housing, and they were able to move forward some different housing projects with that. And Stephen Brown's project is more related to a regional STEM center with multiple different aspects of the STEM project. So STEM facilities, housing potentially for teachers, and training facilities, and to look at how those things could be all together in one development opportunity. These other projects you may not know are from our other areas. I'll move pretty quickly through here, but we have people from Maryland who worked on everything from homeless shelters to regional aggregation of food hubs that would really do more work on how to bring together multiple different producers of wheat or meat or different things into value-added commodities versus just raw materials going out of the community, and to be able to leverage that to provide the Maryland school system and other groups that require a local spend the type of consistent product and amount of product that is needed to serve that supply chain. We had people in Virginia that were focused in on a Main Street development where a local foundation gave the municipality funding to purchase 2 buildings with the condition that when those buildings are purchased by private investors, they are able to then reinvest that funding to continue and recycle the capital for other parts of the Main Street development project. And then we also had projects from West Virginia and North Carolina. We have projects that involved tourism and being able to help people understand the history of regions. We had projects that are looking more at like environmental education and environmental safety, opportunities for evacuation shelters and projects like that, and other mixed use housing developments. So very wide range of different types of projects, and wanted to share a little bit of that with you so that you see that like some of these projects are more health related, some of them are Main Street, some of them are agricultural. It really is based on what the assets are of a community that the community wants to build on. So I've already shared a little bit about some of these projects and the type of projects that people are working on. Some are also in workforce development that are looking to incubate efforts, and we particularly have some of those in this next cohort that are trying to do entrepreneurship and remote workspace, shared space hubs for communities to really help to leverage some of the changes in the way workforce is engaging today. So as we kind of get close to the end of the presentation, so we can really talk about ways that you all may engage, I just want to share in this next slide a couple of recent collaborative actions that have taken place. Last year, Erica, who helps to lead the steering group, and one of our other community development managers who helps to lead the project development work group, we all were able to come together in Charlotte, North Carolina for some meetings over 2 days, and some of the key work that they did, we provided the space and some lunch and some times for us to network and helped with the facilitation, but they made the decisions on the next cohort. Like we said, we've been able to go from 18 up to 25 participants this next year. Hopefully all of them will graduate, but we should have a little larger graduating cohort representing a lot of counties that were not in the program the first time, so continuing to increase the reach. We did have 43 organizations apply this year. We expect that to be larger again next year than it was this year, and that they'll be able to help to spread the amount of communities who have this kind of capacity. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier about the coaching and mentoring is that even if a person applies, we're not just saying, hey, you didn't make it. What the steering group is wanting to make sure we do is we connect those people with additional resources so that if they want to, they can come back and apply again, maybe with a little different project that's more fitting for the training. Or maybe it's that their project just needs to be a little further along to really benefit from the training and build the momentum. So we do have an applicant who's being accepted into this next cohort that applied last year, and the steering group member from that state helped work with them to improve their project. As you all are thinking about people who might participate for the 2026 cohort, which the applications would be open for that, and in next May, June timeframe. What we're looking for is really those communities that are able to work on a project that involves multiple types of investments. So that may involve grants, but it also needs to include other things like tax credits, loans, forgivable loans, recoverable grants, larger federal resources, or private investment that may come in along with those grants. And so, be thinking of those. The things that have often caused a community not to be accepted is that they may be needing too much work on something that the curriculum doesn't cover, like how to form a CDFI, or they may be looking for something more like a grant writing class, and that's not what this is. So after they graduate, we've already mentioned that they've received those mini grants last week, and we haven't been able to communicate out yet that the people have gotten the funds, so I can't tell you who's getting them, but the steering group selected 11 communities to receive a total of $155,000 in technical assistance. We were hoping to fund at least 8, as you saw on that diagram, but there were some really great applications, and some people, instead of 20,000, a little bit less would still really help to catalyze their project, and so they were able to distribute the funds a little further. And as I've already mentioned, there are a number of organizations who have already been able to leverage, and there's some testimonials and things on our website that share that if they had not been in this training, they wouldn't have known about a technical assistance or a funding opportunity, and they also wouldn't have felt ready to go after it. And instead, they've been able to leverage those and really bring capital into their community or additional training. So those are the background, and hope to be able to discuss again with you all, answer questions with Erica and Madeline, and share more about those opportunities in a more conversational time. But wanted to set the basic foundation for our conversation with these slides. And I bring us back to where I started from. What was the opportunity? We have seen people who are in presentations like this and go, hey, actually, this is for me. We've had other people who see opportunities to partner to identify community members that they think would benefit, particularly in areas where they want to fund but need more people to be able to have a ready project, or for people with a larger view who are looking at, okay, well, what is the pipeline of projects we need to get set up in our community to really transition to Main Street, or to be able to do our community health needs assessment accurately? It requires some capital. How do we work on that? And then, of course, on our end, like I said, we're really hopeful that you all will help us think about the right communities in South Carolina to benefit from this for maximum positive impact. That you may be in a position to help some of them with either some coaching, some technical assistance. You may feel like you're a perfect candidate to teach on one of the topics. We do have some discretion each year to shift some of the speakers. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, the resource committee has done some work to be able to support people beyond just the training, to make sure that they can get those mini grants, to get the technical assistance, and to provide some implementation funds. And those are things that really the Fed is not able to provide grants, but we are able to provide some support in some of the other areas like the training and things like that. We had a steering group and project development group that in their wisdom realized if we just train people and then they don't actually have resources in their community to continue working on those projects and implement it, then they may just relocate to places where those resources are more readily available. And then our person-based strategy isn't very place-based. So we're really grateful for the work of the resource committee to help make sure that this effort is benefiting full communities and not just individuals going through the training. So with that, I think we're going to move into more of an opportunity for questions and things that Erica and Madeline will help with. There was a slide there that was briefly up that had some ways you can continue to follow the stories and of some of these people and to continue to learn more. But now we really want to spend more of our time getting to have a conversation with you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Erica. Erica, will you pull up the map showing the geography? Because I know that's where we got to start. We got to start with which counties are eligible to participate. But while you're doing that, I just want to thank those of you on the call who responded to our earlier emails and outreach to ask you to nominate folks. Jason, the fact that you had double the nominations, it seems, and a good cohort of applicants from South Carolina really makes me excited. And this whole program makes me excited because it's like the coming together of so much of what I've done in my career. As some of you may know, I started in small town South Carolina doing Main Street development in Georgetown. And so I'm passionate about rural and I'm passionate about economic development and the impact that even smaller projects can have. And then the other thing that happened to me is when I was at Coastal Community Foundation, Ford Foundation came along and said, we know that for rural to succeed, it needs more philanthropic resources. And one way to do that is to have urban-based community foundations, other philanthropic institutions, look at a larger footprint. And so when I was there, we expanded our footprint from 3 to 7 counties. They've now gone, I don't know, there's some community foundation folks on the call, maybe 8 or 9. But that urban-rural connection, particularly in our state, is so very important. Mm-hmm. I often say South Carolina there are 2 South Carolinas. They're the urban centers that are growing and rapid, and then they are the rural areas that are declining. And that making that link between the two is critical. So with that, Erica, there's some questions in the chat about the map. A couple of counties specifically that seem to be coded as urban, and trying to better understand that. I put the link to your website, which gave a little bit different map option. But can you pull up that map, and can we literally list for folks the counties that are eligible from South Carolina? Is that possible?
We can you see the slide deck now? The slide with the nomination criteria? Okay.
The one is your very first slide.
Okay.
Page 1.
Very first. Okay. I'll get to that. So I will start out by saying that while our research criteria for research is 1 through 9, we do recognize that there are some counties in South Carolina and in other states that have very rural places inside a more urban coded county. So while we have to be very strict on data collection, on the research, for example, on this map, to be clear about who is a 1 and who is a 9, based on the shading, there is less of an adherence to the 1 through 9 for more urban places that have rural counties. We do, though, however, want to be careful. We got some feedback from the hubs and the rural intermediaries that was like, is it really going to be rural? Are you really targeting rural? And so within their own states, they said, so does that mean so-and-so, or does that mean so-and-so? So I'll turn it over to Jason for some more thought on how those selections are. We are fortunate that we have community development regional managers that cover the state. So I cover North Carolina, South Carolina, and can add some color to some applications that may come in that are questionable. So, that can go and say, okay, what does Lawrence look like? Or what do the outskirts in Woodruff look like? While it may be in a county like Spartanburg, that appears to be urban here. So I'll pause there and say that we do have some leeway within the selection process for communities that are listed here as urban, but are rural. By certain other demographics. We can look at zip code data and a few other things just to make sure as we drill down on the application process. So great question. I'll turn it over to Jason to add some additional here. Madeline.
Jason, before you go, let me make sure I understand. I think what you're saying is if on aggregate a county is coded as urban in your setup, if a community meets the rural codes, it's still eligible. How do you find community? Does it have to be incorporated as a town or city?
It does not for this program, Madeline. And what we have done is on the coding itself, the census tract data shows codes 1 through 3 as being urban to metropolitan. 1 and 2 are the most urban of communities, and so there might be a little pocket that is rural, but it's less likely. For our research at the Richmond Fed, they're coding what is usually considered to be a suburban small metro code of 3 as being inclusive of small towns. So like the coding you see in that map is fairly inclusive, and some people actually look at it and go, those areas, some of them are not really rural. What we're looking at, though, is there are places because of their proximity to an urban center that are coded as more urban, but they clearly are more rural. I visited one last week on the way to these meetings that's just outside of Charlotte. It's 45 minutes drive from Charlotte. It shows up as a more urban area, but this small town has a population of 520 people. And when I went there, the GPS took me to a cotton field, and I was a little confused about where I was supposed to be, but I found the spot I was. There's no doubt it was rural, and people were able to end the application, and people who are on the review committee know these communities, the CD managers as well as the practitioners. And so between what is written to say why a community believes that they're rural, and the knowledge that the review group has, then they definitely can move forward with this process.
So what I
And
think,
Madeline,
if your census tract is 1 or 2, no go. Anything else is up for conversation.
I will mention that we do reach out to us. We don't have a list, but good idea, Madeline. That just a direct answer to your question, which was, do you have a list? I think that's a great idea. I think if we were to develop a list, we would be able to have clearly rule. Please call us for these counties is what it would look like. And then we would likely not going to be admitted. I mean, I could see it in 3 sections. So thank you for that idea. As a clear answer, we don't have a list, but we can put one together. Good thinking. I see GP.
Yeah, GP, who I believe has on his Mayor Fountain Inn hat.
Yes.
Another OC staff hat.
Who I drive through about every Friday and Sunday. Right.
Oh, come on by and spend some money.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. No, I'm kind of no hat in particular. Can you talk about the difference? Because when I look at communities like Lawrence County, which is where I live, it's USDA, we are rural. There are different definitions of rural per federal agency, which, as I put in the chat, necessarily isn't a thing because it helps communities. If you're 10,001, you're not eligible in one area, but you might be eligible in another. Can you talk about what is the metric for just a rural county? Is it mostly population based that you're talking about? Are you looking at MSAs or MPO lines or COG lines? What is that formula? If there's an abbreviated version, if not, then I'm happy we can email and maybe do a whole blog post on this for Together SC. But is there an easy answer to that question?
So the easy answer for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond is when you read our literature, like the things that are on the website, and it lists places as rural, it is solely based on the Rural Urban Continuum Code definition, which I won't go through the whole list, but on the extremes, a 1 is metro, counties and metro areas of 1 million population or more. When you look at a 9, it's non-metro, completely rural or less than 2,500 urban population, not adjacent to a metro area. So within the definition of rural urban continuum codes, just like in a nutshell, it has population, it has adjacency to urban areas as a key part of how they figure it, which we don't figure. It's figured outside of us, which is the U.S. Census Bureau based on county populations. So that's what we go through for research. So if you go on there and you look at, say, a map of rural at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, what rural counties are experiencing housing cost burden, it will be based on the rural urban continuum codes 1 through 9. Now, as a consumer of information and research, I get on the Census Bureau's website, and it goes through maps of not every single way, but many ways that people define rural. It goes through rural urban continuum codes, goes through population density, which is what North Carolina Rural Center uses. They say out of their 100 counties, about 75 are rural. And so, there are so many different ways. There's also a layer of the map that uses different codes. So just for fun, if you're into research maps, like I said earlier, that's one way. So GP, thanks for the question. Clearly for our research is 1 through 9, which has population and adjacency to urban as kind of the key research things for how it's coded. But there are so many other places. We don't necessarily adhere to one within the rural investment collaborative. Like I said, we have some gray area that we are willing to work in and define, because we know that, for example, USDA funds may be available for counties like Lancaster that coded as rural, although the northernmost part is growing exponentially. And so we take into account many different things. Does that help, or was that clear as mud?
That helps, but I think I've got some technical map question, but I'll park that for later.
Well, park it into my email.
Yeah,
and we'll get somebody that can help with that.
I'm map curious myself, so.
Okay.
bonus points for anyone who can share the link to the Census Bureau's definition of the rural urban continuum in the chat box.
Oh, yes, I'll try to find it. I have it printed out.
Yeah, I've got it up, but Erica, I'll let you get the one that's directly to them. I've got a university's connection to it up. For us, the reason we're including 3 in our mapping is because it goes up to communities that are under 250,000. So it's some of those smaller cities or large towns that, maybe part of a county is very populated, other parts aren't. When you get into 4 and below, you're looking at populations of less than 20,000. So what we find is that most of our program participants are in that 20, maybe 50,000 level. But our code does go up to 250 in case there's a place that has a larger population base in part of the county, but then the rest of it is really still very rural. So we don't want to exclude communities that need the support, but you would definitely see that the higher volume of applicants that are coming in are from those smaller 20, maybe 50,000 or less communities.
Jason, I think that's very helpful, and it's easy to get a list of communities by population size. So,
Right.
do people feel good about figuring out what parts of their communities are eligible for this? Because I don't want to move on if we're still uncertain about the whole focus on rural here. If you've still got questions, put them in the chat, raise your hand like GP did. Erica, I want to point out that we've got a lot of participants from the upstate, Spartanburg, the low country and coastal areas, Florence, Greenwood, and a number of these philanthropic partners and nonprofit partners actually serve a broader region. In terms of participating with you, could a Charleston-based foundation work with you on something happening in Walterboro? Is
Absolutely.
that okay? Do the applicants
Absolutely.
from the rural?
Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts on how they go about doing that in terms of the local leadership engagement? Any advice for them on how they aim to serve? Because I know for many urban-based philanthropists, it's hard to figure out how to serve the rural components of your geography.
Yes. So I'll tell you both sides of the coin. Where we benefit as the Federal Reserve and did this year is that we had conversations with more urban foundations and other funders who were wishing to invest in some projects that needed to be a bit further along. So they gave me ideas of communities to reach out to that says, I know they have this initiative going on. Can you see if they'd be interested in applying? So that's one way that we benefit. I think that then that they would be in our pipeline and could submit an application and then receive future support from the foundation. So we have seen those types of relationships developing that are beneficial to us, and then also mutually beneficial to other funders and foundations where they are interested in serving, say, just as an example, someone in the we'll call it the deep low country that is more rural, though they are based in a more urban location. So there are opportunities, and I will say that if there's an interest in supporting with resources, monetary resources from foundations and funders, we at the Federal Reserve, the staff have to remain out of the conversation, but we will readily connect. So how do you do that? Which was your question. Just reach out to, in South Carolina, you can reach out to me. You can also reach out to Jason, which we're happy to provide for Together SE to provide our emails. We will then connect you with a resource group member who will represent what the funding would go towards. So we won't be able to be in the conversation, but we can tee you off for that future conversation and welcome that. And then also Jason and I would manage the recruitment of applications. We are able to do that on the recruitment of applications. So we welcome your ideas and thoughts, even if it's just, I have this small community, they're just getting ready. What do we need to do to get them ready to apply next summer? And we can help get them rolling on that. Does that answer the question?
Okay. I think so. Dominion Energy, Paulin wasn't able to join us, but the Dominion Energy Foundation is looking at partnering with y'all in South Carolina and through other states. And that would probably be the first philanthropic partner that you've gotten in the state. I see Claire on the call. I think Power Ed is exploring it in early stages. But I know this concept of investing in a program through a third party seems odd, but it's probably not that different from investing in ETV endowment to support ETV television. You know, you sometimes, when you're a governmental entity, you have to have that philanthropic partner to do the work. And this is a trusted partner you've worked with for many years and feel good about, and hopefully that won't be a deterrent to folks. So briefly, Jason, you said we talked a little bit about some of the projects that are being pursued in various communities. Can you share some examples of what kinds of things we're seeing people developing and the impact they're having or hope to have on their communities?
Yeah, the type of programs we're seeing, I would say out of this next application base, and it holds somewhat true from the first one as well. One of the things we're seeing a good bit is revitalizing vacant properties. So in many cases, that is more in a small town or a main street development. Sometimes there's a specific use identified. Sometimes it's just that the buildings have to be up to the point of readiness where they could be used, and the use is a little bit more like stabilize, get it ready for private investment. Another more specific use is around entrepreneurship and small business development, where those small businesses need some kind of facility or training facility or other supports in order to incubate that work in those communities. And so I would consider those to be some combination of a space that needs to be renovated or purchased, as well as potentially the equipment or training materials that need to be acquired by a community for that space, which requires investment. Maybe some of them are historic structures that are going through more of a historic tax credit opportunity. And therefore, they, in addition to architectural or engineering studies, need a historic structure study. So that has shown up a couple of times as well. And then housing has been a big one. Particularly around workforce or mixed use housing. So there's in one of the other states in the next cohort will be someone who's looking, it's actually a habitat, which usually you would think they have their own funding sources and way of doing things, but they're really looking at a more mixed use and mixed housing type as opposed to the individual, let's build 2 or 3 or renovate 2 or 3 homes per year. They're looking at a development concept in a rural area, which seemed pretty novel to the steering group. And so, you know, where it's possible, you know, some of these are looking at more kind of something that people can learn from, opportunities too. I mentioned a couple of different types. We've also had, like, when you talk about the workforce housing, there's one project that went through the first one I mentioned that's looking at, they don't have housing for teachers and they need to have more STEM teachers because of the local workforce. And so they're addressing some of that housing with the training. In the next cohort, there's some of those that are looking at that from a standpoint of having a difficulty retaining and nurses in the community because of a lack of housing. And so there's sometimes a housing project, but sometimes it's housing at the intersection of workforce. So those are some of the main ones. Another one that we're seeing, particularly in areas where they have natural amenities, is that there's been an explosion of short-term rentals and other types of uses, which is driving up housing costs. So we're seeing some people who are working on housing from one or from lodging in one of 2 directions. We've had everything from hotels be accepted into the program. That's a private hotel, but it's part of the community's need for more lodging in order to make sure that they can also have the economic development from that, but also still have some of their houses be used for housing for locals. And then sometimes it's been like we've got eco cottages that people are looking at doing to directly connect to a national park and other amenities so that there's more lodging that is specifically for that purpose versus the housing. And I mentioned earlier that there was the housing actually organization in South Carolina that went through, and part of what they're needing to do is have land surveyed in order to move it forward, and in some places have titles calmed in order to be able to make use of the properties that they have. And so then the next phase allows them to move into actually having the capital go to developing those structures. So, those are just some of the opportunities. We have school conversions where there are schools that have been retired in communities, and they're looking at, and in some cases, how to turn those into community programming opportunities. Sometimes they have a mixed use that involves housing involved in it. So they're, and sometimes more of like evacuation and more of environmental sustainability type of a project. So that's a pretty wide range of things, which is intentional because our community have different assets and also issues to address or leverage. But I'm also glad if people have thoughts in their mind of something that might benefit their communities to talk about that. If you think that there's something that might fit that I haven't mentioned.
I'll mention also, oh,
Go on, Eric.
I'll mention also that by and large, most of the projects are by a nonprofit. It sounds like sometimes when Jason speaks about, these various projects, that we want to just underscore that each project has community involvement. Sometimes the nonprofit is leading the effort. Sometimes the nonprofit is participating as, let me get this started, and they are the catalyst in the community that are really moving projects forward. The training curriculum also helps define revenue streams for organizations, nonprofits, and others to make things happen so they can understand how the financing of the project will work based on the future revenue. So, so just so you know, that by and large, many the applicants are nonprofit.
And I just want to reiterate our commitment, and I think that the future administration of Together SC will stay true to this, which is that where you have nonprofits that would benefit from membership in Together SC, we would be honored to comp that for them as in support of the program. It's a small thing, but you said some people need grant writing training. Y'all don't offer grant writing training. We do. So where we can support those leaders. And I think you had some of them at the summit last year. And just as a reminder, Erica, and Jason, I don't know if you're going to be at the summit in February or not, but Erica will be there. So that's a good chance to sit down and talk to her relative to, planning ahead for next year's program. But Jason, I wanted to go back to a question. You're working with lots of different states. What does it take for South Carolina to fully participate in this program? What do you need? How can we strengthen this program for you in South Carolina so that our state truly benefits from this? Because I could tell when I went to the KIC meetings, there was a lot more happening in rural and other states than there is here. You had the Department of Commerce on your list of partners. They have one person talking about rural, and that is about it. So what could we do to make sure that South Carolina fully benefits from and participates in this program?
Yeah, I mean, so South Carolina will definitely be able to participate at some level. And so to maximize the benefit in South Carolina, making sure that Erica has good representation on the steering group to be able to help direct and guide this work in a way that understands South Carolina's rural work. We may be looking for a new steering group member there. And so someone who has a large view of South Carolina could be helpful on that group, which meets in person twice a year for decision making and one or two other times virtually to help make sure that they're staying up to date, but also provide input along the way. We have the project development work group that's really helping to identify communities. So someone who's maybe more of a practitioner and just knows communities that could benefit. Erica could help connect with Peter in order to make sure, that those state priorities are being able to be leveraged and the ones that are applying. Of course, everyone can help with that, but we do need some people who are actually in the work group. So that's some human ways, that you can help to make sure that that's taking place and helping to guide the work. I think that the other aspects are we can guarantee that there are going to be seats in the training because the Federal Reserve is underwriting most of the cost of the training and the management of the work of those projects. But for groups to get the mini grants to be eligible to receive technical assistance funding of up to $20,000 for some of the participants, and then eventually some of the implementation funds, we're looking at in the range of about $100,000 per year is what the steering group and the resource committee are looking to raise in each state. And so right now that funding is pretty irregularly distributed across the region. We have most of the $350,000 raised has come from North Carolina and some in West Virginia with a larger foundation gift, some national funding that can be used anywhere. But there's been less so far philanthropy in South Carolina that has contributed directly to projects. So we were able to cover with national funding South Carolina's mini grants this year. And the technical assistance funding for the people who applied out of this cohort. I had some funding in the budget that we could use for some technical assistance support. But moving forward in future years, those implementation grants, the technical assistance, those things really should be from outside of the Fed's budget. And it takes about $100,000 a year to award, to have the mini grants per participant of $2,000, to have maybe two or three technical assistance grants of up to $20,000, and then about $40,000 to $50,000 in implementation funds available on a competitive basis for the cohorts.
Thank you for recruiting national dollars to support South Carolina's participation.
Absolutely. We've got Annie Casey is at the table, and we're working on other conversations with national foundations. But one of our even funding from South Carolina is helpful in some of the other places too. Like we have the resource committee received a challenge grant of $150,000 from the state credit union in North Carolina. And so that funding gets unlocked, once $450,000 has been raised for the initiative overall. Now, what's important to know is that funds that the resource committee raises can have some restrictions, right? So like you understand, and we understand that if a local foundation makes a contribution, it may be that their board would allow it to be used anywhere in South Carolina, but they may also have to say, this is our service area. It can only be used for counties in these areas. The important thing there is to make sure that we have participation over the course of the 5 years that matches that, to make sure that the funds can be drawn down and effectively used in those communities. So in order to really leverage those national dollars, they like to see the local investment. They don't want to underwrite the whole thing for a state.
And that makes total sense. And you may have said this earlier, but the Fed's commitment is 5 years program at this point.
At least 5 years, and we've just completed the first. I mean, it's going to be hard for us not to be committed for at least 6 years, because it really takes 2 years for a cohort to go through the whole process. So the last year will maybe not be a training, but
the South Carolina has such few philanthropic resources, and what we have is very geographically focused in smaller areas. Sisters of Charity, I think Donna was on here, and Blue Cross Blue Shield and Duke Endowment are the three that fund across the entire state, and then some of our corporate partners. But so if you're a community foundation or a United Way, and you've got a certain geographic focus, and you see opportunity, first thing is get your people applying to participate in the program, but know that if they participate in the program and they got a good project, you may want to be ready with some targeted money for your geography that would be available to those participants. Is that how it would work?
Different organizations have, again, we can provide overviews anytime people need it of what the program is for their organizations, and the resource committee follows up if there's an interest in anything that goes onto the dollar side. But I can speak historically. What we've seen is, smaller foundations in United Ways have sometimes been able to give $2,000 to $10,000 in order to support the mini grant. or a participant in their community, or they've been able to provide the 2,000 mini grant plus some funds to help with the training cost. Usually until a community has somebody into the program, they're not able to give it a larger amount than that. But some of the larger regional foundations or regional organizations have been able to give more in the $20,000–$25,000 range in order to support some of the things I just mentioned, but also to help with the technical assistance grant. And so, then the more national and state foundations, those are the ones that might have less of a restriction according to geography, where they are giving anywhere from, right now $50,000 to $100,000, and even 150 has been received by the resource committee. And those that help to fill in the gaps, because, like what we know is that this project was needed because there's less access to capital in rural communities. So like we need to fill in the gaps in places where nothing is available so that these projects can move forward. But where even those 2,000 and 5,000 contributions have been made, it helps to show to the larger investors that, look, there's 20 communities who have given in South Carolina at the level that they can, but there's these other communities where there's no foundation, and we're glad to fill the gaps in.
Yeah. I want to share a little personal anecdote to hopefully convey to some of our participants the possible impact that this work can happen. Back in the 1960s, my father was very involved with something called the Historic Charleston Foundation. It was just getting going in Charleston. And a very wealthy investor from New York came to town and sat down with the then executive director and my father and said, "What is it Charleston needs?" And you're going to laugh at this answer, but what Francis Edmonds said to Dick Jenrette was, "We need a quality hotel, and we need that hotel in 2 years so that we could host a meeting of the National Trust for Historic Preservation." And that's when the Mills House was built. And it's hard to imagine Charleston needing a hotel in this day and age, but that is the kind of impact that an economic development project like these can have in your communities. And so the idea, I know not many of us as funders are used to investing in economic development. We tend to be more focused on community, the charity aspects of it. So I want to encourage those of you that can look at it to think about this bigger picture and do it with a partner who knows economic development well, like the Federal Reserve. So with that, I think, Erica and Jason, we've covered all that we wanted to. Is there anything that you've got that and just to reiterate, Jason, you were saying 100K per year per state, but that can be, 10 groups giving 10 in different geographies, and the matching of geography, as you said. So
yeah. And I also want to call out what let's see if I can scroll back up so I see the name and make sure I get
Mr.
right
Hannah.
credit. Yeah, Troy Hannah had mentioned in the chat that like the social capital and connections are in many cases just as important as any financial. And so I did say at the beginning, this might be coaching and mentoring that is the opportunity for contribution. It isn't just dollars. And just to have that social network to make sure people are meeting each other, it may be that the people who apply to this program find out about it some other way and you all don't even have them on your radar yet. And that's why, I made sure we worked with United Way Worldwide to find out what the local United Way chapter was that might serve in those different areas. And I met with each one of them to talk about the program and to make sure they knew who was going through the program. Just to make sure that where we can, we're making those connections. We tried to do some of that with foundations and other groups too. But that is definitely important because some of these people, just knowing they're not alone in these rural communities to do this work and to find out about resources, like it might be your grant writing program, or it might be, their local United Way or chamber, to help them connect to those connections. They really don't always have that. And that's so important too. So thank you for that point in the chat.
And Spartanburg is a perfect example of that because Troy, the leadership development program y'all have run for forever that has put out so many amazing leaders. I could see those leaders as being potential applicants, and I could see participants benefiting from being in that program. So that may be
Yes.
a way where philanthropic organizations and those doing capacity building can support within kind. Because
Yes.
Spartanburg
I
County,
will mention too, thank you for teeing that off, and also Mr. Hannaford. We do see, particularly in, say, for example, North Carolina, where there are leadership development programs, that is another great need that was identified by our rural intermediaries, that leadership capacity and building in rural communities is another prong that we have not yet gotten to within the Rural Investment Collaborative. I had the opportunity to learn about the grassroots program very briefly, but when we were seeing in North Carolina, they have developed a program called Homegrown Leaders, and then they have another one that's like rural economic development, like a intense year-long program that we can all become feeding systems within our own communities. And it doesn't have to be along a certain, you do this first, you do this second. I think there's opportunities for those who have participated in a training like Grassroots or Leadership South Carolina to come to us, or vice versa. Perhaps they're ready now to jump to another program, and just to keep continuing to build the capacity and the knowledge of those who are in our rural communities. So yes, Madeline, did you ask for closing thoughts here?
yes. Well,
Yes. So
I haven't seen any other questions in the chat, but
Okay.
if you've got a question before we close out, please raise your hand or drop it in the chat. And if not, thank you all for your time and your interest in this, what I consider a very important topic. And I hope that you will connect with Erica and Jason in the coming months and look at how collaboration and partnership could advance your objectives and theirs, because that's what it's all about. Erica, closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you all for being here today and for welcoming us. I look forward to seeing you in your own communities, I hope, as I serve both North Carolina and South Carolina, and a native South Carolinian. So you have a place in my heart. So please do reach out. I know that we have some additional questions that we left in the chat. GP, I'd love to hear about you and maybe connect you with our regional and community analysis team for a conversation about maps. They love them even more than I do. And then also there were a few questions in the chat about whether we'll be sharing the slides. I did have those that asked me. I can share those directly if you'll be sure to put your email in the chat. We do also invite you to follow us on social media. I had the slide up for a second, but you can search on whichever active on all platforms, but particularly on LinkedIn. We have a lot of reports that come out there if you want to connect professionally. And then also to subscribe. If you would like to get an email from us every day, we can do that. If you would like to get one from us every month, we can do that too. So we invite you to subscribe to learn more about the Rural Investment Collaborative. We have a full suite of information at richmondfed.org. Type in Rural Investment Collaborative, it will all come up. And so we invite you to do that as well. And so I owe some things in the chat, and just want to say thank you. And I'll turn over to Jason.
I just want to say thank you too. And I've gotten down to South Carolina, like I said, one time with one of Madeline's meetings so far, but looking forward to doing it again. Really what gets me excited and helps me to continue to do a lot of the behind the scenes work with this project is when I do get out in the communities and hear firsthand the impact that it is having, and also just the amount of hats and the amount of efforts and the amount of appreciation that communities have for building these skills. These rural leaders are just really carrying so many different roles and responsibilities, and to be able to help them bring some of their community's dreams to reality is a real gift and a good story. Erica shared with you how you can hear some of those stories and learn about some of the things that are happening. This presentation hopefully was informative, but those stories are much more inspiring. So I hope you'll take a look and listen to those.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks.